It's an honor to be here with you today at one of the finest universities in the country and indeed in the region. I would like to first start by thanking those that built and run this university, the staff, faculty, administration, and of course, my fellow trustees. Without your commitment and dedication, none of this would be possible, and it's an honor and a privilege to serve this amazing organization. Next, I'd like to congratulate all the parents in the audience. Հարգելի ծնողներ, պարզ է նաև, որ այսօրը ձեր շնորհիվ է։ Վստահ եմ հպարտ եք ձեր զավակներով եւ արժանի եք դրան, որ խորքում մտածենք, այսօրը ձեր օրն է։ Շնորհավորում ենք ձեզ։ And last, but certainly not least, to the graduating class of 2025. As I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I asked the question, if I was sitting in your shoes today, what would I want to hear? So I'm going to share a couple of stories from my life and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. I hope you find them useful. I was born in Banazor during the Soviet Union and moved to America when I was 6 years old. I arrived on a Thursday, and on Monday I went to a school where nobody spoke Armenian and I didn't speak any English. And when they looked at me, they were like, "This one looks a little dumb. Let's hold him back for a year." That was the bad news. The good news was I had no idea what was going on, so I didn't really realize it. But my parents, they were a different story. They definitely realized what was going on. They had just moved to a new country with young kids and elderly grandparents, with no language, no job, and no education that was recognized. And I got to have a front row seat to that struggle. One of the first things I remember was how my dad learned English. He bought this notebook, and what he would do is during the day, if he heard a word that he didn't understand, he would just write that word with Armenian next to it in terms of what it meant. And over the course of several years, he just filled out the notebook. And every time he would hear a word that he didn't know, he would then go to the next page and write it down. And so what ended up happening is he would end up having these random collection of words. But it worked for him because it ended up keep getting him the most common words that he needed to know. And for years later, some random words would show up like consequence. And he'd be like, "I know that word." And he memorized every page where that word was at. And that's how he learned English, because he recognized that he couldn't do what he needed to do unless he learned the language. He also ended up getting a lot of different jobs. He started out working at a gas station. Then he worked as a taxi driver until eventually he found a career as a plumber. Now, by the time this happened, I was around 12 years old, and I decided that I needed to get a job. And so I got my first job at my uncle's bakery making llama juice. And then after that job, I got another job as a telemarketer, calling people and trying to sell windows over the phone. And then after that, I got a job selling lotion at the mall. And it was around this time that I took a class in high school that was called C++ for beginners. And I started to learn how to program. And it was hard at first. It wasn't easy. But at some point, it just started to click. And suddenly, I felt like I'd just been given a superpower where I could sit there and think about something, punch some keyboard keys, and then a piece of software would come out. I thought it was magic. And around this time, for school, I was following a real estate agent who happened to mention that he was looking for someone to make him a website. And so I immediately said, "Oh, I can make you a website." And he said, "Oh, how much?" And I just threw out a random number. And he said, "Yes." Except there was one problem. I didn't know how to make a website. But I knew somebody who could make a website. And so I made a deal with him where I split the money. But the deal was he had to teach me how to do it. And so he did. And then after that, I got another similar project and another. And so that became what I did. And it was around this time that I was applying to schools. And it was one of the most terrifying points in my life because I'd always thought of myself as someone who's smart, who's going to go to college. And I applied to Stanford, Berkeley, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, and USC. And so the first letter that came was from Stanford, rejection, which was like, okay, that was kind of a long shot anyway. And then I got a rejection from Berkeley, and I was like, okay, that was kind of not good. And then I got rejected from UCLA, and then I got rejected from UC Santa Barbara. And at this point, it felt like my life was just falling down on me. And I just barely made it into USC. And I know I just barely made it because I got admitted in the spring and not the fall. But I didn't care. I got in. And it was also around this time that my dad went from being a worker at a plumbing business to taking on a bunch of debt and then buying the company that he used to work for. And so suddenly we became small business owners. And so at this point, I stopped making projects for other people, and I decided that I was going to help the family business. And so I started going and trying to help in whatever way I can. And then something happened that was probably the most important thing that I got out of my experience at the university. I met two of the most important people in my life during that time. First, I met Ara, who I would later come to recognize as my business soulmate. We ended up co-founding a business together and so on. But when we met during the Armenian Student Association ski trip between my school, USC, and his school, Stanford. And when we met, there was this weird, cosmic alignment because it turned out that he was also the son of a contractor. He was also working on a similar program. And so it was like, oh, you computer, I computer, let's computer together. And so we started working together. And then through him, I met my life soulmate. But when I met her, I was terrified. She was the most beautiful girl that I'd ever seen. And it was, I was for sure that there was no chance that I would have with her. And so I somehow talked my way into getting a ride to some party that we were going to. And I know I didn't make a good impression on her because till this day, she doesn't remember giving me the ride. After we got to the party, I mustered up the courage to go ask her if I could get her a drink. And the look on her face wasn't so much like a no. It was like I can't think of a good reason to say no, but okay, fine. And so, dejected and my spirit broken, I got the drink, I gave it to her, and I walked away, thinking there's no chance that this is going to work out. Little did I know that I unintentionally did a Jedi mind trick, because then she started thinking, wait a second, why isn't this guy talking to me? And it got in her head. And then that was all I needed. I needed a little bit of an opening, and boom, then I got another soulmate. And so by far, of anything that I got out of my college experience, meeting these two people was by far the most important. And so then it was time to graduate. And at this point, R and I had started building kind of a prototype, but it was still just something for our dads. And we had a decision to make. We could either take the path of getting a job at a Google or a Facebook or something. But we thought the most prudent thing to do was I thought the most prudent thing to do was to take my lotion selling some resume and start a company out of school. And so, as you'd imagine, we made every possible mistake you could possibly make. We raised a little bit of investment to start the business and then basically immediately lost it all and proceeded to get to work. And it was hard. There wasn't a lot of progress. 1 year went by, 2 years went by, 3 years went by, and things were not going well. And I was about to get married. And so I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go to grad school. And so I took the entrance exam. I did relatively well. And I applied to the top 3 programs in the US. Luckily, due to my incompetence, I got rejected from all of them. And so I just kept going. Went on for another year. And by the 5th year, this was the low point in the history of the company. Now, at this point, we had started a company. It had a terrible name. And we were such tech geniuses that we had built the product on an older platform. Somehow, in 2007, we missed the internet. And we're like, oh, let's build a desktop application. And so now we're 5 years in. We have a product that's on an older platform that doesn't scale. And pretty much the only thing that we'd done correctly was that we had actually obsessed over first our dad's business and then our other customers' business. And so even though we had a small number of customers, we had really loyal customers and happy customers. But there was only like 8 of them. And that year, when I looked at how much money I made and how much money I brought home, it was less than the minimum wage. It was literally illegal how little money I brought home that year. And this is when I just had a son, and I felt like the biggest loser in the world, that I was failing my wife, I was failing my kid. And so I did the responsible thing. I went to R's house and I was having a breakup conversation. I said, look, we gave it a good shot. This is obviously not going anywhere. I have to take care of my kid, blah, blah, blah. And in the middle of that conversation, we get a call. We get a call from a big plumbing business who said they'd heard good things about us and asked if we were interested in participating in their search for a new software. But we knew that the product we had wasn't going to work. It was just built on the wrong platform. And we pretty much had run out of all of money. We didn't have any money left. But after putting 5 years into it, I figured, why not just take this last shot? It was probably not going to work. And so we did. We threw away the old program. We went online and we started looking for names that were available. And after the 37th attempt, we found one that was available, ServiceTitan.com. We bought the domain and we started clicking away. And then, as they say, the rest is history. And so when I take a look back and I think about what lessons there are to learn from this, what lessons you should take away, there's 3 lessons that I can think of. And I think these 3 are, in my experience at least, universal ingredients for success. The first lesson is, it's all risky. From what I've observed in my life, most people will significantly overestimate risk and significantly underestimate opportunity. I'm shocked almost on a daily basis how often perfectly smart people say no to opportunity because of this bias. When confronted with the threat of either underestimating yourself or overestimating yourself, it's much more common to underestimate oneself for the false comfort of the safer path in order to avoid the discomfort of change or the fear of failure. Don't let yourself fall into this trap. My life changed when at some point along the way, I figured that it's all risky. If you think trying is risky, see what happens. See the risk when you don't try. If you think letting yourself fall in love is risky, see what happens when you don't find love. It's all risky. Getting married is risky. Having kids is risky. Making big career moves is risky. It's all risky. And I made all sorts of mistakes in my life, but one thing I did consistently well was I took my shots when they were given to me. Now, this doesn't mean you should go out after this and start a business. In fact, if you need someone to encourage you to start a business, you probably shouldn't start a business. You should only start a business if your conscience won't let you not start a business. But what you should do is recognize that there's no such thing as a risk-free path. Saying no to one risk is almost always saying yes to another. So for you, it could mean just choosing to take the risk of taking more control over your career and asking what you need to do to get a promotion. It could mean versus the risk of staying silent. It could mean changing your job instead of taking the safer path of staying the course that you're on. Or it might even mean changing your career entirely and switching to an industry where you have no experience and you have no education. Because especially in a world that is changing quickly, taking the safer path might be the riskiest option of them all. That's why they say, never underestimate the man who overestimates himself. Learn to overestimate yourself and take some risks in life. Lesson 2. Find something worth obsessing over. Find something worth suffering for. If you want to achieve big things, there will be periods of your life where you will need to be out of balance, where you obsess over one thing at the expense and sacrifice of others. And this is where having the right partner makes a big difference. I had the blessing from my two soulmates, both in the business and my life, where during these periods of extreme imbalance, I got nothing but love and support. And when you have that, your partner is a source of strength. And when you have the wrong partner, it's quite the opposite. Without this obsession, without this willingness to suffer for years in pursuit of the mission that we believed in, there's zero chance that we would have been successful. And what we did get right was we obsessed, in our case, over first making our parents' businesses successful and solving their problems through technology, and later obsessed over our customers' businesses and making them successful. And if you're sitting here thinking, well, I'm not really sure what to get obsessed over, I have a suggestion. And it's the same suggestion Reb made in the previous undergrad ceremony, which is, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing about it, but it's artificial intelligence. Why am I talking about artificial intelligence? Because throughout my life, I've had the opportunity to see a world before computers and a world after computers, a world before internet and a world after the internet, a world before mobile phones and a world after mobile phones. And I believe the change that's coming is going to be bigger than all of those things put together, and it's going to happen faster than all of those things put together. The best way I could describe what's happening right now is in a world of knives, guns have appeared. Do not get caught with a knife in a gunfight. Don't be afraid about AI taking your job. Be afraid of somebody else using AI to take your job. And so if there's one thing that you might consider being obsessed about, it's learning how to use AI. I'm not just talking to the engineers in the room. It does not matter what field you're in. It does not matter whether you're in law or you're in healthcare or you're in engineering. I promise you, there's an opportunity to get better in whatever domain you are if you learn how to use this tool. Spend the time, become familiar with what it could do, become familiar with what it can't do. Both of those things are extraordinarily useful, and I believe will be critical to being successful in the future. And lesson number 3, resilience through identity. One day I was sharing my story with somebody, and I was telling about my childhood and all the challenges that I saw and all the problems I had to go through. And the way I was intending for the story to be heard was, look at all the hardship that I've overcome. And he said something that completely changed my perspective. And he said, yeah, and that's the best thing that could have happened to you. And he was absolutely right. Because it turns out, not only is resiliency one of those universal ingredients for success, I've never met anyone successful who wasn't resilient. And it also turns out that one of the best ways to build resiliency is to go through suffering. And nobody knows more about suffering than the Armenians do. If there was an Olympics for suffering, I don't know if we would win gold, but we would probably win a medal. But you know what else we would win a medal for? Resilience. And when I think about what allowed me to take the risks I was able to take, what allowed me to become as obsessed over the various things that I got obsessed over that led to my success, it was because I got to see the struggle. I got to see my parents take incredible risks. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But it was that resiliency that allowed me to both take the risks as well as persevere when things got really tough. In fact, being Armenian and the legacy of suffering and survival is certainly a big part of my story. And not just in some psychological sense. Because another way of building resilience is to have people in your life that want to see you succeed, that believe in you. And in that sense, when I reflect what really drove me to be successful, my 2 soulmates are Armenian, our first customers were Armenian, our first employees were Armenian, our first investors were Armenian. And you can call me whatever you want, but don't you dare call me a self-made man. My story is our story. And as you think about how you're going to write the rest of your story, know that you too are surrounded by people who want to see you succeed, who believe in you. And so along the way, when life presents you a choice between playing it safe or taking a bet on yourself, I hope you overestimate yourself and find something worth suffering for. Thank you.